By the early 1940s, the world was not simply at war, it was collapsing. Across Europe, entire nations fell in months. The Nazi war machine rolled forward with terrifying efficiency, armored divisions cutting through borders as if they did not exist. In Asia, Imperial Japan expanded with relentless ambition, seizing territory across the Pacific. Democracies faltered, cities burned. Millions lived under regimes that crushed dissent, erased identities, and governed through fear. For a time, the United States remained an ocean away from the devastation, watching, calculating, preparing. But history has a way of closing distances quickly. And when the attack on Pearl Harbor shattered the illusion of distance, America understood that neutrality was no longer possible. The nation would not enter the war halfway. It would commit fully. What followed was one of the greatest mobilizations ever witnessed. Factories retooled with astonishing speed. Assembly lines that once built consumer goods now produced bombers, tanks, rifles, and ships. Women entered industrial workforces in unprecedented numbers. Rationing became part of daily life. Families planted victory gardens, bought war bonds, and listened to casualty reports on evening radios. Within months, millions of Americans were in uniform, training in deserts, forests, and coastal camps, preparing to cross oceans they had never seen. It was not merely a military expansion, it was the transformation of an entire society. In North Africa and later in Italy, American forces faced experienced German units and learned hard lessons about modern warfare. Those campaigns were not glamorous. They were costly, complex, and at times chaotic. But they forged a battle-hardened army capable of operating across vast distances and in unforgiving terrain. Commanders adapted, logistics improved. Air power was integrated with ground assaults in increasingly sophisticated ways. By the time the Allies began planning the liberation of Western Europe, the American military had evolved into a coordinated force of immense scale and flexibility. Then came June 6, 1944, the largest amphibious invasion in history. Thousands of ships crossing the English Channel under gray skies. Paratroopers dropping into darkness behind enemy lines. Young men sitting inside landing craft, knowing that when the ramps fell, survival would depend on courage and instinct. Omaha Beach became synonymous with sacrifice. German defenses were prepared, entrenched, merciless. The first wave suffered devastating losses. Yet the assault did not collapse. Small units regrouped. Engineers blasted open paths through obstacles. Naval gunfire crept dangerously close to shore to silence enemy bunkers. By nightfall, the beachhead held. The Atlantic Wall, once believed impregnable, had been breached by determination and blood. As Allied forces advanced across France, American troops played a central role in pushing back Nazi occupation. Town after town was liberated. Civilians who had lived under fear for years emerged into streets lined with soldiers, carrying unfamiliar accents but recognizable symbols of freedom. The war in Europe was not just territorial, it was moral. When American troops discovered concentration camps, the full horror of systematic genocide became undeniable. Soldiers trained for combat were suddenly witnesses to crimes that defied comprehension. The mission hardened. Victory was no longer about strategy alone. It was about ending a regime built on annihilation. In December 1944, Hitler launched one final gamble. The Battle of the Bulge tore through the Ardennes forest in a desperate attempt to fracture Allied lines. The winter was brutal. Snow swallowed roads, temperatures plunged. American units found themselves surrounded, cut off from supplies, under relentless assault. Yet they held. In Bastogne, when German forces demanded surrender, the response was defiant and succinct. Reinforcements broke through. The offensive stalled. Germany's final surge in the West collapsed under American resilience. While Europe burned, the Pacific demanded its own brand of endurance. The island-hopping campaign was a brutal chess match across thousands of miles of ocean. At Midway, American naval intelligence and decisive action crippled Japanese carrier strength, shifting the balance of power in the Pacific. At Guadalcanal, Marines fought in dense jungle against a determined enemy. On Iwo Jima, the battle unfolded in suffocating volcanic terrain, riddled with tunnels and fortified positions. Every yard gained was contested. The raising of the American flag atop Mount Suribachi became more than a photograph. It became a symbol of persistence under unimaginable strain. Naval fleets clashed across open seas. Submarines disrupted supply routes. Long-range bombers struck industrial centers deep within enemy territory. American air crews flew mission after mission, knowing the odds were unforgiving. Some never returned, yet the cumulative pressure strangled the Axis' ability to sustain prolonged conflict. By 1945, Allied forces closed in from all directions. The final phase of the war forced decisions that remained debated decades later. The Pacific theater had proven that invasion of entrenched positions could cost tens of thousands of lives in weeks. Military planners projected staggering casualties for a full-scale invasion of mainland Japan. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki brought sudden, devastating destruction. Within days, Japan surrendered. The global conflict that had consumed continents ended abruptly. When the guns fell silent, the United States stood not as an empire claiming spoils, but as a power faced with rebuilding a fractured world. Through the Marshall Plan, billions were invested in reconstructing Europe's shattered economies. Former enemies became democratic allies. Institutions designed to prevent another world war took shape. The generation that had crossed oceans returned home to build industries, families, and communities shaped by shared sacrifice. The enormous feats of the American armed forces during World War II were not defined by invincibility, but by resolve. They were defined by the willingness of ordinary citizens to endure extraordinary hardship, by sailors who held the line in open seas, by soldiers who advanced under machine gun fire, by airmen who flew into hostile skies again and again, by a society that unified behind a singular purpose. Pride in that era is not about glorifying conflict. It is about recognizing what was required when global stability collapsed. In a moment when authoritarian regimes seemed unstoppable, the United States committed its strength, industrial, military, and moral, to altering the outcome. The beaches of Normandy, the forests of Belgium, the jungles of the Pacific, and the ruins of liberated cities remain silent witnesses to what happened when a nation decided that freedom was worth defending at immense cost. History rarely offers simple narratives. War is complex, tragic, and heavy with consequence. Yet in the midst of devastation, there are chapters that remind future generations of what collective courage can accomplish. When the world burned, America did not retreat behind its oceans. It moved forward. And in doing so, it helped shape the modern world that followed.